There we go. And I'll be watching the chat if there are any questions or anything, though I know Slide often was pretty good about checking on that too as he chit chats. So awesome. Let's go. Thanks, Slide.
Sure. Thanks for the introduction, Sean. So what I want to show today is the process of creating custom Python libraries from a code repository, publishing them, consuming them from, on one hand, the same research project for your collaborators or for yourself, or consuming them, consuming the library from other research projects. There are some nuances because of the governance restrictions that we have in place. And I will show the process of consuming it in a code workbook as well as in a code repository. And I think for some of you guys in the call, we've shown this process before. We've made some small tweaks to it, and there has been a few confusions about publishing and where to publish. So I apologize if this feels repetitive, but hopefully this will clarify and streamline the process and make it easier for everyone to author and share code. So maybe what I'll do first is I will, let me start with a code repository and maybe write a couple of utility functions in the global code. And then from there, switch back to a code repository and create the library from there. So let's call this example EUG utility functions. Let's maybe import a couple of notional synthetic data sets just to have be able to test. If I go to the Cynthia notional data, perhaps let's get condition measurements and the demographics tables. And so right now I have 3 data sets and I can start making transformations in R, Python, or SQL. One of the ways to factor code, if you have a bunch of functions that, like utility functions that you reuse in your code, and you don't want to write them at each one of these transformations and you want to factor your code. One of the ways to do that is using the global code. So there's an R and a Python global code. And the way it works here is, and some of you are already familiar with this, you can write your imports here instead of writing them in each one of the transforms. Whatever you write here, whether it's an import of a Python package, or if it's a function that you define, it will be automatically within the scope of each one of the individual transformations, and it will be recognized in here. So I'm gonna just really quickly write or pass some very dummy Python functions. Let's say the first one takes a data frame and drops a column in PySpark. Column from data frame. This takes a data frame and maybe you want to specify a column to drop. Obviously, this is very easy to do in one function call in PySpark or in Pandas. I just wanted to have like a set of functions that I can work with here. So this will return the data frame, but drop in this input column. Let's add maybe another one that just does something like drop in nulls from a specific column. So let's do another function. Let's call it drop nulls. And this one takes a data frame and a specific column. And then this one would probably need a, if I want to use PySpark, let's import the functions API. Import here. And then let's just return a, maybe we can redefine it. So we're gonna filter out the nulls based on, or you know what, we don't need this actually. Let's just do the other syntax, which is specifying the column and then is not null, which only keeps the rows that are not null in this column C as an input, and let's return this data frame. So I'm going to remove this. So that's function 2. Then maybe one last function, let's call it the identity function. This returns the data frame. These are obviously silly examples. Your functions will probably be more sophisticated. But so just to work with this. So the idea here is obviously you can use these functions here. So you can do something like if we're using person table, we can do drop column from let's read the person table in a local data frame. And let's redefine it, drop column from data frame, and then this will take my person table. And then let's say we want to drop gender concept ID, just to be able to, so that would be a string, gender concept ID. And then let's return the results. So let's call this sample person table. This is just to test, and the idea again here is it's a way to factor your code. The limitation of this obviously is that the global code is only in the scope of your code workbook. If you start developing Python libraries that you want to reuse in other workbooks, so as you can see here, I think the column was dropped. If you want to have a set of functions maybe packaged modularly in a library that you want to reuse in other code workbooks, in other code repositories, either within your research project, or maybe you're working on a separate research project, or maybe you want to publish it for other researchers to use within N3C. That's when it's a good idea to create a Python library from a code repository. The other way, which we usually show, which is code workbook templates. It's also practical for some cases, especially when you have a set of just consecutive transformations. But some people prefer, but generally templates take as inputs data sets and then return data sets as outputs. This could be, the Python library could be some utility functions that is doesn't need necessarily a data frame or a data set as input. So it gives you more flexibility. And so in order to do that, I'm going to go back to my let's see, remove these here. These are things I was trying before the call. Let me create a, whoops. Let me create a code repository. And so when you create a code repository, it gives you the choice between a few types, several types of code repositories. You can mix them in the same code repository. It's just that initializing with a specific type will create the skeleton of the set of scripts that you'll need to use that type. So in our case, we're going to pick Usually the most common one is a data transforms code repository, and that's used to build data pipelines. So that takes data set inputs and then returns one or multiple data sets outputs. In our case, we're going to use the Python library type. And so let's give it a name, and that will be the initial name of our library, although it can be changed. So maybe let's call it EUG lib. Let's just call it EUG lib. And then let's initialize. I think I should close these, sorry. So when you initialize the code repository, the way it's structured is, so this is considered to be a custom Python library with, I'm not sure why, let's call it EUG lib. The way it's structured is the name of the library is EUG lib. And I believe that's the name, and that's the name that you use to import the library from a code workbook or a code repository. You can change that name if you look at the hidden files here. There is a gradle.properties. Yeah, for some reason, I think when I created it, I didn't write the name properly, so it didn't catch it. But you can change the name here, and that would be the package name that you'll be able to import from other places. And so the way it's structured is you have the library, and then under this folder, source folder, you have all the packages. So right now I only have one package called my project. Let's actually rename it and maybe call it my package 1. Under each package, you can have several modules. So let's create the first module. Let's call it my module 1, and that's a Python file. That should be a Python file. And let's copy maybe a couple of these functions. Maybe these two go to my first module. And then let's create maybe a second module. So new file, true, and copy the third function, the N3C function. So the way it works is usually, and I'll do it in the code workbook, is when you define the library like this, that is the thing that you import. And then when you import it, you can actually call your packages. So for example, using from my package 1 import my module 1, or just import my package 2. So that's how you kind of like call the, you call these modules and these packages from a Python transform. So again, just terminology wise, this is the library, these are packages, and under them you have modules. Let's just, for the sake of example, really quickly create a second package. So that would be a new folder, and let's call it package 2. And in order for every package to be published, it has to have an init file. So if you accidentally delete this init, then your package will not be properly published. When you create a folder, it automatically creates this init file. So let's just create a new file, and let's call this module 3. And maybe just real quick, write a function here that let's say selects a specific column. So it takes a data frame and a column to select, and then it just returns df.select this column to select. It's just another example to have two packages with a few modules. So once you're done developing your, let me actually hide the hidden files. Once you're done developing your library, you can commit your changes. And then in this README, there are instructions on how to publish the package, but essentially all you need to do is, in order for the package to be published, you have to tag it, to create a tag, which corresponds to the version of your library. So if you go to your branches section here, we're only working on the master branch so far, but if you go to branches and you go to click on tags, you can create a new tag, and let's maybe call this 100. That's the first version of my package, and then click create tags. And so this will run some checks, and these are CI checks that just, for example, check the syntax and other that things are written properly, and it runs in hopefully very quick, usually very quickly. And once the checks pass, that means that the package can be published. While this is running, I see that, let me see Joe's question. Has it been addressed, Sean, or is there still a question from Joe?
Oh, we were just chatting about the pros and cons of global code and code workbooks, and
okay,
we weren't sure whether or not global code ends up in the Git export if you export the code repo.
Yes, so
workbook, I mean.
Yeah, so the one thing real quick about the global code is if you create a template is just another way to like package your code and have it reused somewhere else. And this is how you create a template. When you create a template, it automatically copies the global code under your transform, so that if someone else imports and tries to use your templates, they're also using the global code. The thing that you have in your global code is defined in that transform. So that was kind of like off topic, but just to mention that. It sounds like the checks have passed, or maybe almost. Let's just refresh it. As you can see, there's this script that is called library publish that is trying to publish the library. While it's doing that, let me create a code workbook to show you how to import the library that I just created. Let's just call this import custom lib. And let's check on this. So now you can see that it's published, and I'll show you in a bit how to import it from another code repository, if that's what you're interested in, if you prefer working on a code repository. But from a code workbook, and this is the thing, one of the things that changed compared to how the process used to be before. Before, in order to be able to use this library from a code workbook, you had to kind of publish in something that we call the shared channel. And so you had to go and edit this build.gradle file and add some block of code here that says publish it to the shared channel. Right now, you don't need to do this anymore. It's kind of automatically published as long as you use the proper profile that is enabled to use custom Python libraries, and I'll explain why. So from your code workbook, the one thing that you should do here in order to be able to use EUG lib is to pick this profile called custom Python libs profile. This profile is enabled to import any library that is custom, that is defined by someone in the enclave from a code repository. And so if you use other profiles, this won't work. You'll have to use this custom Python libs profile. So if I can pick this profile and then do customize, and it might not work first, and I'll explain why, but you can see here EUG lib is published. And if I click on update Spark environment, it will I will be able to use this library in my code workbook. We're working on enabling all the other profiles, including the defaults and light profile and profile high memory, to be able to use custom Python libraries. That should be the case within the next week or two. So just in the meantime, you have to use this custom Python libs. But in the very near future, any of these profiles should be able to, you should be able to use it to import custom Python libraries. Now, while this is initializing, I'm pretty sure it will not work. And the reason for that is something I forgot to do. This profile is set to work with Python 3.6. And I think that whenever you create a Python library by default, it's using Python, it's built with Python 3.8. So there will be some sort of conflict. If you go here to the code repository and you click on libraries, these are the libraries being used. This should be switched to Python 3.6 or whatever is compatible with the profile that you're using in code workbook. So something to note is that Python 3.8 is the highest version available for use in code repository. In code workbook, it's still not, the highest version is still 3.7. Python 3.8 is available, but there's still some, it's not officially released and will be released soon. So if you're using code workbook, the highest version of Python that you can use is Python 3.7. Just wanted to mention that if in case you're having some failures like the one I just had right now and you're wondering why, code workbook doesn't support yet Python 3.8 fully, but it should support it soon. So I'll just go back here and pick Python 3.6. Yes.
Do most of the default profiles use Python 3.6?
I think they're the default ones are with the 3.7. This one I created it with 3.6 for testing purposes, but we will upgrade it to 3.7 soon.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if there's any general guidance for the widest applicability.
Say that again, Sean?
I was just wondering if there's any guidance for the widest applicability of a Python library.
You mean which versions to use? Is that the? Yes, you should use 3.7. I think that's the guidance. In this will soon, the custom Python libs profile will soon be set with 3.7. We did it with 3.6 for testing purposes. But even if it's not, you can go yourself and just set it back to 3.7. But until we support Python 3.8 in code workbook, you should be publishing your libraries in Python 3.7. This is just for demo purposes. I'm using 3.6 right now. After updating this, if I go back to the file structure here, yes.
I just want to correct something, because actually in the enclave, and most of the stuff that the people in the enclave have access to from my study of it is all 3.6. There's only, I think the only one that I remember, there's like a brand new one that was just created called Long COVID that is 3.7, but almost all of them are 3.6.
Which profiles are you?
I mean, just
are those
pick
the
any.
custom profiles for your research projects?
Yes, yeah, basically like a lot of the custom profiles, like that I think a lot of people in the enclave use.
Yeah, if you use some of the custom profiles that have been created a while ago, they probably were created with 3.6. I believe light profile and the latest defaults are using now 3.7. So just to show you an example. If you click here, oh, interesting. It's still
Yeah,
set
that's
at
3.6.
3.6. My bad. Okay. 3.7 is definitely supported if you want to switch to that. 3.8 is not. You'll still have some issues, is I think the main takeaway here. But yeah, thanks for the correction. So like I was saying, when you update the library version here, if you go to this configuration file called meta.yaml, you'll see that it's now using 3.6. So let's commit that quickly. And create a new tag with the new version. So new tag, and this should be just like a minor patch where we change the versions, and let's give it a couple of seconds to load. And while we're doing that, I'm going to go back here and yeah, it's already with 3.6. So we're just going to wait for this check to pass, and we'll try to load it again. I'm going to show you in the meantime how to import it from a code repository in the same project. And then the third thing I wanted to show is, in case you want to publish it outside of your research project, there's an additional step, which is submitting the library to the knowledge store. And the reason we have to do that is for permissions purposes. Anything that you create in your research project is only available for collaborators in your research project. Anything that you want to publish outside, whether it's code logic or documentation or anything else, has to be put in the knowledge store. And that's the way other people can see it and be able to import it. So let me create a code repository, and let's call it consuming repo. And this one, let's make it a transforms code repository. So we're going to use our custom library on a set of data transformations. Let's see if this passed. So I'm going to maybe refresh this. And oh, sorry, this was not the right one. I think it's reinitializing because it automatically detected that I have a new version, but let's just make sure we're picking the right version. Where is EUG? Yeah, there you go. So instead of automatic, we're just gonna specifically pin it to this latest version. And this is with Python 3.6, so hopefully it should work. Maybe I'll just remove some of the other packages that we don't need to make it quick to initialize. Right, let's remove all of these. And click on Update Spark Environments, and hopefully this should work now. While it's loading, and we can do some tests, I just want to make sure I hit on all the points that you need to do to publish, and then we can do the testing. This is the consuming code repository. And so here it's structured a little bit differently in that you have data sets modules under my projects, and this is kind of the syntax to import a data set and produce an output data set, it has to be under this transforms df decorator. So for example, if I want to use maybe this person table, let me just pick the path of this. And let's go back to here, and my input would be the path to this person table. And let's just make N3C training area. One second. I'm just going to grab this path as an output. Let's call it output dataset or output sample person table. So the way it works is you have one or multiple outputs as a data set, and you could have one or multiple outputs data sets as well. And then you have a compute function which you could name the way you want. And from here, we can actually, if we want to use the EUG lib that we just produced, similarly, you just go to this libraries and then you type in EUG lib. And then you click on add library. You shouldn't be seeing this error message, this message when you're trying to import it from the same project. So we're working on removing this. But if you're trying to import the library from the knowledge store, you will see this message asking you to add dependencies, and you will have the permissions to add the dependencies. So once we do that, I should be able to just go here and from here do things like from package one, I think it was called my package one import module one. And I believe this should work. Maybe I should commit. It just says imported by unused, but it did recognize my no module named my package one. EUG lib is here. Let's just merge in the changes, and it should be able to recognize it soon. While it's doing that, interesting, I'm having a Python 3.6. I will come back to this in a bit. I just want to make sure I hit the points on all other things, but this is just a matter of figuring out the right versions to make my library work. Going back to the consuming repository, you can see that EUG lib has been loaded in my repository. So if I go to here, is it called my package one? Let's see. So I have two packages. My package one, which has my module one. Sometimes it just takes a bit of time to show an update. So essentially here, now that you have module one, you can do something like df or source df equals, and then do module one that I think one of the functions in module one was it was basically drop columns from df. We can use the same function, drop column from df, and then source, let's call this output data frame, and we're going to return the output data frame. And so again, what we did, just as a reminder, after publishing the library by creating a tag, we just went here to the library section. We've added EUG lib, and then we started using it, using all the packages, in this case, package 1, and we used the module 1, the drop columns from the df function of module 1. And this should work out. Sometimes it just takes time to be recognized. Maybe I have some syntax errors, but that's the usual process. Let me switch to the knowledge store process real quick, and then I'll come back on to testing. But that's essentially the process. So if we go back to here, this is the library that I produced, EUG lib. I can consume it from a code workbook. The only constraint here for now is that you have to use this custom Python library profile to load the library in, or I can consume it from another code repository, but that's within the same, assume this is my research project. If I want to be able to publish this for other researchers to use in other research projects, there is an additional step. And then this additional step is to publish it to the knowledge store. So if you go to the home page and click on the knowledge store, I see there are some chats here. Okay, sounds like Sean, you're answering Joe's questions, but feel free to interrupt me if you have questions about this. I'm just trying to speed up to hit on all the points, and then hopefully we can go back to questions and to testing. So in the knowledge store, this is the collection of all the shared logic that has been published by other researchers. Most of the logic is code workbook templates. We have, I think, one Python library that has been published so far, and this is the semantic similarity library of from N3C. So if you click on it here, it just gives you an overview of what the library does, and ideally the owner of the library has put some documentation to explain what the library does. And here you have a link to the source code, semantic similarity. And so if you click on the link, you'll be able to see the source code. And in order to use it, you can use it the same way, meaning from a code workbook, just add the library to your environment, or from a code repository, just add it from the library section. Here he has, I think, just input together a documentation. So in order to submit our EUG lib to this knowledge store, I would click on new knowledge objects. And I think I'm realizing something, which is that I can only, if I do training area, I can only submit from a actual research projects. My library has been created in this enclave used in this N3C training area. So really quick, let me just move it to a research project. Perhaps just for the sake of example, I'm going to move it to the logic liaison research project. It's one of the support teams within N3C.
It's one of the things that only Saad can do with his admin-like powers.
Yes, moving things between projects is typically disallowed for governance reasons. So I am going to move this into this folder here for now. And so suppose now this This is your research project. You've produced this library. You want to share it with other people outside of this research project. Now, if I go to the knowledge store upload form, I would select the my research projects, in this case, logic liaison, and then I will select the logic that I want to share. And it's packaged into this thing that we call a knowledge object. So if I go here and let me just look for EUG lib. So clicking on this, now this is, you can see here I've attached my library. I can just call this EUG lib example. I will probably delete it after this presentation. This is a set of dummy Python functions. So basically, the more description you do here, the better for other people to understand what your library does and be able to use it. This is probably, I would call, these are like the categories of what you're sharing. It could be a cohort template, a concept set template. If whatever you're sharing doesn't fit into these categories, you can mark this as uncategorized. This is probably, in my case, a utility template. It's not using any UMAP domain tables as inputs, so nothing here. And then its type is that it's a Python library as opposed to a code workbook template. So that's all you need to do. When you do that and you submit, it doesn't show the library immediately in the knowledge store. There is an additional step that basically the Palantir team receives a notification and then we'll reach out to make it available in the knowledge store, basically to release it. You've created your knowledge object, which contains the library, but in order to release it, we need to move it to a shared folder. So right now, if you look at the knowledge store, you'll see that the library is not there yet. If you, but so in order for it to, and now I'm going to show you what kind of like we do in the background to make it available. Basically, it's just an additional step to move the library to a shared location where you can still edit the library and other people can access it as a read-only source code and they can run it from their project. So if I go now here, what I will do as an admin is I will move this to the knowledge store project. So this is not something you have to do. All you need to do is fill that form and then you'll receive a notification saying that the support team will reach out. And then we just basically move the library to a shared location. We make sure it works. We ask you, if possible, to attach a documentation, even though it's not mandatory. And we release it. So I'm going to move this to the knowledge store shared logic projects as a utility template. And so now it's, and when we move it here, we actually drop the location of the library in your project so that you know where to find it if you want to continue editing it. So let me call this link to a shared library location. So now you have this link, which basically takes you to the location where now you can open and continue editing the library. So once we move it here, we make sure that you have edit access to it. In this location, in this research project, everyone in the enclave has access to this. And so they'll be able to import the library in their project. So the last step is to release it. And the way we do that is there's this application called Object Explorer, which is not, like you don't have to necessarily venture here, I mean, you feel free to take a look at these. This is basically the collection of all the knowledge objects released and unreleased. And so let me just find the EUG library that I just released. Maybe if I type in EUG. This is my knowledge object. It contains the link to the shared logic, which is my code repository. Ideally, I want to attach a link to a documentation, which is a report. And I can talk about that later if we have time, because I just want to make sure I leave time for questions. But essentially, all what we do here is we just mark this as released. So the release status. This is something that an admin would do. And what this would do is that it would make your knowledge object visible from the knowledge store. So if I go back to, I'm not sure where my knowledge store is. I, again, opened many tabs, but let's go back to it. And now, as you can see, your library is visible here, which means that anyone can import it in their research project. They have now the permissions to do so. They can look here for metadata and information about the library. They can click on this. This will take them to the code repository. They won't be able to edit it. It will be read-only. Only the authors and maintainers of the library will be able to edit it. Ideally, if you attach the documentation, it would be in this tab. And then now I can go to a research project. Say this is my research project, and the process is exactly the same. If I want to import it in a code workbook, I just create a code workbook. I pick that custom profile, Python libraries custom profile, and I import my library. And same thing, if I want to use it from a code repository, I just go here and click on the libraries and look for it here. And I should have the permission to do it, even though that library is not in my research project. I kind of went a bit fast towards the end to hit on the steps of this process. So I want to maybe pause here for questions before I go back and try to do some testing if we have time. Are there any questions about this?
I have a question, Sade. Sorry, someone else said something too.
No problem. Go ahead, Seth.
So I think this is really great that you explained how to do this better. I'm sure I'm not going to remember all the steps that were involved. So I can't remember. I missed part of this because I had to step away. But do you have like a documentation that describes all this stuff as well, or will we just kind of have to watch the video if we need a reminder on?
So great question, Seth. The documentation is accessible from the knowledge store here. It will actually be released on Wednesday. It's still kind of work in progress. I just put a placeholder here. This will take you to the tutorial. This is kind of like a relatively new process. So we've just been documenting it. And in this tutorial, it will tell you first how you create the custom Python library, how you publish it within the same project. If you want to publish it to the wider N3C community, what do you do? And if you want to consume it from a code workbook or a code repository, what do you do? So this should be complete by Wednesday. So you don't have to watch the video if you don't remember a specific step and you want to just see how, look at the documentation in here. So again, from the knowledge store, which is available from the homepage, you click on this documentation resources, and there is a section called Custom Python Libraries Guide, which should be released this Wednesday.
Thanks. That's perfect.
No problem. And I think Hannah had a question.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you publish your library through the knowledge store.
Yes.
So you still have privileges on your library, but can you create branches and merge and do all that stuff that you would normally be doing in your own research project?
Yes, I mean, you have the same access to your code repository. Within this code repository, you can create branches, you can continuously collaborate on this with your other collaborators, but only the ones who are within your research projects and who are authorized to edit this, this code repository. You can do the same things that you usually do, it's just that you'll be doing it in a different location, and which is the knowledge store project, but in that location, you'll have the same access.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. I mean, it gets a little bit tricky if you think people are actually using your library.
Yeah.
Then you have to think twice before you merge to master, right? Because you could be screwing up someone who's actually trying to use your library.
So even if you merge to master, unless you specifically create a new tag, which signals to the consumers that there is a new version, they'll have only access to these tags. So, and when you create a tag, by default, it's like you can choose what version it's pointing to. By default, it's to the master, but it's like, if you make another update to the master and you haven't created a tag, they'll be using whatever was corresponded to when you created this tag. So you you're deliberately choosing what the consumers will be using by creating the tags.
Okay, thank you.
And the consumers won't be able to create PRs or change anything in your code repository. They'll have read only to the source code, but they'll be able to use the tags that you've published.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. I think Sean had a question.
I do. I'm still kind of thinking about the Python versions. Is it possible to create a Python lib that can work with like Python versions 3.6 or 3.7? Or do you have to pin to a particular version with a Python lib?
I think if you create something and with Python 3.7, then it should also be working with 3.6, I believe, unless you have some really specific. I'm trying to think.
I don't know how the Unite platform works, but with regular Python, it's usually, version X or higher.
Yes.
Typically, you don't ever go the other way around. So, you say like greater than or equal to 3.6. That's with like Anaconda or pip dependencies.
Yes, yes. I think that's what I was trying to articulate, and you said it well, Seth. But the other thing is also, yeah, you can do something like Python greater than or equal to 3.6 here. I think if you just do Python and don't specify the version, it will default to the latest available, which I believe here is 3.8. Right now, we specifically pin it to 3.6 or 7 because that's what Code Workbook supports, but you don't have to. You can leave it automatic if you're consuming it from other code repositories.
Yeah, I like that idea of using greater than or equal to 3.6, because then it would work in Code Workbook environments that are using 3.6 or the ones that are using 3.7.
Yes, yes, that's yeah, I agree. That's helpful indeed. I'm sorry if I took too long. I wanted to cover a lot. I hope this was enough information. I didn't really have time to run my transforms and test it in front of you guys, but hopefully this is clear enough for the process. Are there any questions about this? I just kind of wanted to give some announcements of like, what is it that we're working on next and what we're gonna show next, but are there any questions first? Cool. So I think there are a few things that are next that could be relevant for you. One is obviously the documentation will be released for this process on Wednesday. A few next steps, code workbook, also in code sharing. In the past and up until now, we've been able to share code from code workbook using templates. Very soon you'll have and probably that's next week, you'll have a code workbook duplicator application, which lets you just plainly duplicate a code workbook from one place to another without necessarily having to templatize it. So that could come handy in a few cases. Similar to the way where if you're familiar with Contour, you can just click right and duplicate the analysis and it will create a brand new analysis with the same things. So that's something that is coming next week. A few other things are in code repository Word, the use of GPUs will be available, should be available sometime next week, as well as things like the ability to create your own custom profiles with a manager and manage them and rename them. So these are all things that you'll be able to do pretty soon. I don't know if there are any questions about that, or hopefully they're relevant for your work.
Yeah, that's really good to hear, Saad. That was one of my questions in general, is some of those issues I had filed that you had recently responded to, which I appreciate, but that I think would make it a lot easier for a lot of people using the code repos and then also importing them into code workbooks, because there are issues that you run into, even the simplest code repos with the dependencies like we were talking about, and having some of those features like the ability to see the logs as it's running in real time, I think would save a lot of people a lot of headaches and frustrations, just like you kind of encountered today. But for the average user, having an extra diagnostic tool would really like ease that process a lot for them.
Yeah, so that makes sense. So the tool, one of the tools you'll have is a manager to create your own profiles. Something that I find useful for diagnosis is really these like checks here in code repositories, the logs here, especially if you have like dependency issues. It's usually helpful for me to look in here and see what are the conflicts. Hopefully this is helpful, but yeah, I mean, we keep encouraging people who have such issues to reach out to us, Slack or filing issues, and we can help as well. Cool. All right, I think that's all I had. Hopefully this was helpful and useful. We're always open to feedback and suggestions.
Thank you, Saad. That was a lot of good info right there.
No problem. All right.
And I believe Saad in 2 weeks is going to be presenting on that code duplicator application. So that should be pretty fun.
Yes. So is it next week or in 2 weeks?
2 weeks. Because we're on every other week presentation topics.
Okay, that sounds good. It should be ready next week, but I can present it within 2 weeks. That sounds good. Cool.
All right. See you, everybody.
Bye.